Life's a funny old beast, isn't it? All it takes is for one person to clog onto something and that's it. The world explodes and it's the only point we talk about. Take wrestling, naturally, because this is a wrestling YouTube channel. What were you expecting? If it wasn't a discussion about two people grappling in their pants, you've taken a wrong turn. Anyway, there have been plenty of matches that have amazing moments or talking points, but because one solitary part captures the imagination, for some reason everything else goes out the window like a pair of old shoes. And you shouldn't be throwing old shoes out the window, by the way. What if they fall and smack somebody in the face? Unbelievable. Ignoring the highlights of a contest, though, is just as bad as doing away with old footwear in such a manner, and it's something we're gonna correct right now as we go on a little trip down memory lane. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, and this is 10 wrestling matches better than the one thing you remember them for. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified. Ding, ding, done. Number 10, Brian Kendrick and Paul London versus William Regal and Dave Taylor versus the Hardy Boys versus Eminem. Happening at Armageddon 2006, which was 12 years ago as I say these words, and that's simply terrifying. What most people remember from this is Joey Mercury's face getting absolutely destroyed by a ladder. It's still tough to watch now because it's just metal smashing him in the skull. The impact, man. Impact. Now, while we should focus on that because how could you not, this is one of the few multi-man ladder matches that actually mixed high spots with a pretty awesome narrative, mostly thanks to the inclusion of William Regal and Dave Taylor. The Brits, knowing they couldn't outfly their rivals, simply stay out of the way and let all those people kill each other before struggling because of their fear of heights. It's excellent storytelling, and while it may not have been as important as what the Hardys, Dudleys, and Edge and Christian did, it's still a good watch. Praise is also due for everyone who not only laid out a meticulous match, but did so even after Mercury lost his facial features. Aside from taking him out of the bout, the sheer amount of blood that pours forward must have been difficult to deal with. It was tough for me, and I'm just an idiot watching it on TV. Given that it mixed improv with comedy and sheer out craziness, however, we should remember this as far more than what just happened to Joey. Although you shouldn't forget that either. That just wouldn't be fair. Number 9, CM Punk vs Rey Mysterio. Stopped mid-match at Over the 10 2010 after Rey Mysterio had Hurricane Rana'd CM Punk's head into a barricade and busted him clean open. That's the talking point from this clash. Fans didn't like that medical staff took forever to try and stop the excessive blood loss, especially as we all remember the Attitude Era. Then, everything was fine no matter what. We should forget about that now though, because this hair versus mask clash was getting serious heat before this accident, with the crowd wanting to see Punk get his. The problem, of course, was once CM's cut was cleaned up, the audience had given up as the momentum was now dead. Until, that is, the straight edge superstar did what he had to do, which in this case was a stiff strike and a snap suplex outside of the ring as Rey ragdolled himself around. All of a sudden, the fans were invested once more. This is equally as famous for the post-match head shave, which signified the next chapter in Punk's career, but there's so much more here, right down to it serving as a sign that the future champion was ready to step into the main event. Also, just because, there's nothing wrong with making sure wrestlers are okay mid-fight. That's far better than the alternative. Number 8, Triple H vs Cactus Jack. The problem with any kind of Hell in a Cell match with Mick Foley is that almost instantly the reaction is going to be, well, it's not as good as King of the Ring 2008. That's debatable, but you can see the logic. Get past that mind, and Cactus Jack vs Triple H at No Way Out 2000s is fantastic no matter how you look at it. It's not at the level the two managed to reach at the Royal Rumble just months earlier, but be it the storytelling or the sheer violence, this is a good Hell in a Cell bout that benefited everyone, especially Triple H. It's a shame that Foley reneged on the retirement stipulations, but that's just wrestling. It happens all the time, so being upset about it is pointless. There's also moments here that deserve to stand the test of time, especially Foley on top of the structure brandishing a burning barbed wire 2x4. That's just ridiculous and therefore cool. Don't forget that Mick still took that mad bump here too. The ring canvas may have been gimmicked, but what difference does that make? A man still fell from that height and smashed into the floor. There's every chance Triple H wouldn't be in the position he was today without this run of matches, and that's why it's important to remember them for what they were, and not just because Mick Foley had an almost impossible bar to try and get over. Number 7, Taz vs Bam Bam Bigelow. At ECW Living Dangerously 1998, Bam Bam Bigelow took Taz and drove him clean through the ring canvas. It was unreal. And sure, today it's par for the course, but 20 years ago this wasn't the case as fans weren't prepared for it. It was so different, every other promotion simply stole the concept. Away from that, however, Taz and Bam Bam treated everything before that as if they were engaged in a personal war, and it was chilling. For starters, the former WWE man is showing on every level why he's one of the best big men ever, and the human suplex machine sells that from start to finish. He knows that Bam Bam is twice his size, and he keeps that in mind throughout. It's called psychology, people, and this match has all of it. It's also, as you imagine, incredibly violent, as ECW was during the late 90s. There was nothing else like it. Taz threw Bam Bam into a group of fans who missed the monster by mere inches, and seeing him land on some unfolded chairs will make your face grimace. It's very of its time and a good window into what Paul Heyman's promotion was back then, and while the canvas tearing is what we all talk about, there's far more here outside of that, because it was insane. Number 6, The Shield versus Kane and the New Age Outlaws. Why the Shield were booked in this at WrestleMania 30 is anyone's guess. A lot of fans saw it as wasting the second hottest act in the company, and they were doing it at the biggest show of the year. That was just odd. And you're right, it was. However, this was also Roman Reigns, Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins essentially squashing 3 legends in the shape of the New Age Outlaws and Kane. The trio just took apart the veterans here with ease, and seeing that happen after a bunch of dives and inventive double team maneuvers was just a solid way for WWE to make people take notice of their latest group. And sure, in a perfect world, the Shield vs Wyatt family series would have been carried forward a month, but we still got a decimation here that probably helped no end. This is exactly what should have happened when such powers collided, and the fact it did under WWE's watch was pleasant if nothing else. It's more interesting to watch now given what we know, but this was Vince McMahon shining the spotlight on his young up-and-comers no matter what that meant. Damn right. Number 5, Diesel vs Bret Hart. This match and Survivor Series 1995 are often remembered because it saw Kevin Nash and Bret Hart smash through the Spanish announce table, a spot that from this point on would become as commonplace as locking up. Not so 23 years ago, and it was here when breaking wood became so popular. Outside of that though, this scrap is a masterclass in how to act as a wrestler if your opponent is bigger than you. Despite being a face, Bret knew he had to act mean here to show how difficult it was to take on someone as tall as Nash. That's exactly what he did. He resorted to all kinds of tactics he thought he needed to win, right down to biting his face. Often considered an inferior sequel to their Royal Rumble clash, this is still a wonderful window into how strategy and realism can play into wrestling. The Hitman chops away at Nash's knees like he's a giant tree, relying on the idea that he could win if he turned this into a marathon. As the smaller man, he could wear Big Sexy down before pinning him to the mat. 1995 is always known as the year full of crap gimmicks, and it was, but there was still gold, and this is a shiny example of that. Wrestling done right, if you ask me. Number 4, Bam Bam Bigelow vs Hack. It's pretty easy to forget that Sandman went to WCW. Known as Hack, World Championship Wrestling could never portray him in the way he needed to if he was going to make an impact, so instead within weeks he was just another dude. Brought in to try and cement the idea of having a proper hardcore division, it didn't work at all, which is why his match at Spring Stampede 1999 against Bam Bam is often used as a moment to remember that yes, Sandman was actually hanging down south for a while. These problems were all on the company though, because James Fullington, the man behind the madness, took this very seriously and not only got him pretty decent shaped, but showed he was more than just beer cans and Singapore canes. Against Bigelow on this night too, he put in a shift, hurling himself off the stagecoach set within the first minute and just pulling out everything he could from that point on. It's a shame that during this period WCW was dying, but still, if you want to see the Sandman doing what he could in the promotion, this is where you should head. Number 3, Ric Flair versus Mick Foley. Now you've got to take age and condition of both Mick Foley and Ric Flair into account when talking about this, but I think that's fair. Wrestling is hard at the best of times, but when you've been through what both men had by SummerSlam 2006, well, fair play to them. In general, it's remembered as the time Flair decided he would be smashed with barbed wire and hurled into thumbtacks, a fact that was even harder to swallow given he was 57 years old at the time. However, on top of that, an I Quit stipulation gave a logical reason for random breaks as the two wiggled around on the floor, and both stayed in character throughout. The Nature Boy chopped away at Foley, although his arm was all wrapped up in barbed wire, and even managed to get the line in, "This is an I Quit match, not a lay around on your ass match." A full-on war that defied the ages of Foley and Flair. It never came across as two wrestlers past their prime, and instead is just a testament to how skilled both men are. Number 2, Scott Steiner vs DDP. Greed 2001 was the last WCW pay-per-view ever, and therefore Steiner vs DDP going on last was the final main event put on by the company. Stands to reason that's why everyone would remember this. What actually sucks more than that is that Big Papa Pump and Page put on an excellent match here, which made an even bigger joke of the soon-to-be WWE Invasion angle that flopped and flopped hard. There was still life in WCW, and if Vince McMahon had just got more players in to wage this war, who knows what would have happened? Probably the same, but still, we'll never know for sure. The atmosphere is there from the opening bell, as the real-life history between the two had been well documented. That was hammered down on when DDP spat in Steiner's face, to which he responded by almost killing Page and calling him a bitch. Classic Scott Steiner. This is also a good reminder that the Big Bad Booty Daddy was a good performer in the early 2000s, or at least before he started doing maths, and that he was rather inventive. For example, here Steiner stole a crutch from a young fan and smacked Page across the back with it. As you do. Number 1, Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels. Obviously mainly known for the Montreal Screwjob at the Survivor Series 1997, it's unlikely anything else will ever be taken away from this. It's the most controversial ending in WWE history and in many ways changed the business. As we know today, it was also ripe for constant conversation even 20 years later. There is more here if you can ignore all that, because the real life animosity between the two is so strong you can smell it, and there's an idea here that any time this could become an actual fight. It's also filled with neat little touches, such as both choking each other with their national flags and WWE officials surrounding the ring in case they did just start brawling. It has all the makings of a damn good contest before HBK locked in that sharpshooter, and obviously we'll never know what the plan was, but there's more here than just the death of kayfabe, although that still plays a pretty large part, because of course it does.